Hello, my friend, and welcome to Something for Everybody. My name is Aaron Mashpitz, and today is a solo episode of the podcast where we are discussing the U.S.-Israel relationship partnership alliance. That's what we're discussing, the U.S. and Israel alliance. More specifically, we are going to answer the $3.8 billion question and take a deep dive into America's true ROI, or return on investment, on this Israel alliance that everyone seems to be absolutely obsessed with. But before we start, I found this information through Green Beret Nap Time on X, and the full Substack article with images is linked in the show notes below. So check that out for references. And other sources include the U.S. Department, Congressional Research Service, U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, JNS Flame Analysis, BESA Center Report, and statements by U.S. officials. But please, as said in the Substack article, please research for yourself, question everything. So again, most everything I'm saying is from that Substack article by Green Beret Nap Time, which can be found on X and linked in the show notes below. Hello, my friend. Before we jump straight into the episode, I would love to share the sponsors of this podcast. And the sponsors of this podcast are all the businesses that I've created that are really part of the ecosystem that run this whole thing. And at the top of that list is Patreon. Patreon is the home of our exclusive community where we do bonus episodes, live streams, Q&As, and merch discounts, and so much more. Patreon is the number one way to support this podcast and to support my mental health nonprofit called You Are Loved. Next, we have my clothing brand called Shop for Everybody. Every hat and every t-shirt you see me wear on every single episode of this podcast is from Shop for Everybody. It's the home of For the Dads, For the Moms, all Something for Everybody merch, and it's the home of all You Are Loved merch. So that's shopforeverybody.com. And the last thing is my sports performance brand called Champions Adjust. Again, if you see anything Champions Adjust related, it's all found at champsadjust.com. It also has its own podcast. We also do a sports show through Champions Adjust. And if you're looking for any mindset or mental skills classes, they can all be found at champsadjust.com. And so if you want to stay up to date on everything that we're doing here with all of the businesses that I'm involved in, please go to aaronmashpitz.com and sign up for our weekly newsletter. Thank you. Now, on to the episode, completely uninterrupted and ad-free. Here we go. So, every year, the United States provides about $3.8 billion in security assistance to Israel, a hefty sum that some critics see as a one-way giveaway. Is the U.S. getting anything good in return from its investment, or is it really a one-way giveaway? To find out, we must explore the returns, economic deals, military benefits, intelligence gains, and tech innovations, and stack them against that annual $3.8 billion. We will even tackle a circulated and eye-popping claim that this alliance yields a $48 billion return. So, one clear payoff from the U.S. and Israel partnership is found in the marketplace. The two countries have been free trade partners since 1985, and today bilateral trade is booming. In 2024 alone, total trade, goods, and services between the U.S. and Israel hit $55.7 billion. For perspective, that's about the same scale as U.S. trade with countries like Colombia or Switzerland, not too shabby for a nation the size of New Jersey, which is Israel. This two-way trade, hear that, this two-way trade isn't just numbers on a spreadsheet. It translates into actual American jobs and business opportunities. In fact, trade with Israel is said to support over 255,000 American jobs across sectors from agricultural to high tech. Yes, you hear that right. 250,000 U.S. paychecks rely in part on our commerce with Israel. The job creation doesn't stop at trade. Israel has invested billions in the U.S. economy through business ventures and startups. By 2019, the total stock of Israeli direct investment in the U.S. was about $36.6 billion, making Israel one of the top 20 sources of investment in America. More than 2,500 Israeli-founded companies operate in the United States, from tech R&D centers in Silicon Valley to manufacturing ventures in the Midwest, employing tens of thousands of Americans directly. Very important information. Let me take a drink of water. And then in Massachusetts alone, for example, a study found Israeli-founded firms generated 9.3 billion in revenue, supported over 27,000 jobs in that state, nearly 4% of its GDP. It's clear that the alliance isn't just about government aid, it's also about mutually beneficial business. As an analogy, think of Israel as both a consumer, or think of Israel as both a customer and a startup partner for the U.S. that is buying American goods, like Boeing aircraft, while also fueling U.S. innovation. Israel is second only to China for foreign listings on the NASDAQ stock exchange. In short, economically speaking, America's 3.8 billion investment, it is investment, helps seed a much larger garden of trade and commerce that blossoms into tens of billions of dollars and hundreds of thousands of jobs at home. So that's very important. Point number one in the U.S.-Israel alliance. So when it comes to military and strategic returns, supporters of the alliance often argue that Israel functions as sort of an unsinkable aircraft carrier for the United States, one that patrols a tough neighborhood so U.S. forces don't have to. This really isn't just a colorful metaphor. U.S. generals and defense officials have noted that Israel's very presence and military strength save the U.S. a fortune in what would otherwise have to spend to protect power in the Middle East. Very important. This, sadly, is a fact lost on the multitudes of people who will scream, "We don't even have a base in Israel." Yes, because the entire country is our base. As former U.S. Secretary of State and NATO Commander General Alexander Haig once estimated, if Israel didn't exist, America might need to invest 15 to 20 billion annually to secure its interests in the region, including the cost of deploying real aircraft carrier groups and divisions of U.S. troops. Instead, the U.S. spends the 3.8 billion on aid to Israel, and Israel largely handles its own defenses, and it helps stabilize friendly neighbors like Jordan. By Haig's logic, though, that's like saving 11 plus billion every year in equivalent U.S. defense costs, which is a pretty direct ROI in pure budgetary terms. As another comparison, consider that a single new American supercarrier can cost 10 to 13 billion to build, plus 1 billion per year to operate. For the price of one carrier, the U.S. could fund its aid to Israel for 3 years, and Israel's value to U.S. security has been likened to several carriers worth of force projection in the critical region. And unlike a U.S. carrier, Israel won't require American sailors or Marines on board. Isn't that America first? Isn't really that the definition of America first? No U.S. troops needed on the front lines in the Middle East. Then, as we keep moving forward, then there's more down to factory side of military ROI, defense industry benefits. So U.S. security assistance to Israel isn't a blank check for Israel to spend anywhere. In fact, by agreement, at least 70 to 75% of those funds must be spent on American-made military goods and services. Another important fact. In other words, billions of U.S. taxpayer dollars boomerang right back into American factories each year. Israeli orders for, F-35 jets, Boeing helicopters, and a cornucopia of U.S. munitions have helped keep American defense contractors busy and American workers employed. By one estimate, the current aid package supports 20,000 U.S. jobs in the defense sector directly and thousands more indirectly. It's essentially a Buy American requirement built into the aid. So another thing that people miss or don't understand or just blatantly ignore. Over the long run, these orders add up. Analysts note that over a 20-year period, roughly 80 billion of U.S. aid to Israel generated on that order of 150 to 200 billion in U.S. defense contracts, tax revenues, and related economic activity. The Iron Dome missile defense system is a great example of a code development payoff. The U.S. actually put 500 billion into a joint R&D for Iron Dome, and now American companies like Raytheon manufacture Iron Dome components, so much that the U.S. Army has acquired Iron Dome batteries for its own use. And so it's a virtuous cycle. U.S. funds help Israel develop cutting-edge systems, which U.S. firms then produce and profit from, and sometimes even adopt into American arsenal. So that's a really good cycle to understand the partnership and the alliance. And then we move on sort of to like a broader security perspective. Israel often tackles threats that also threaten U.S. interests, from Hezbollah in Lebanon to ISIS offshoots in the region, thereby reducing the burden on American forces. And unlike some U.S. allies, Israel has never asked the United States to send troops to defend it. That has to be America first, right? Israel has never asked the United States to send troops to defend it. There are no American soldiers permanently stationed in Israel and none fighting Israel's battles. Again, this is what we want, isn't it? Isn't this America first? Really think about this. In fact, U.S. commanders have trained in Israel to learn about urban warfare and bomb disposal, benefiting from Israel's hard-earned experience in counterterrorism. One could quip that Israel is the one ally that acts like a net security provider rather than just a consumer. All of this has strategic value that, while hard to put a price tag on, unquestionably augments U.S. security for a relatively modest cost. As a Pentagon official once put it, having Israel in the region is like having the world's largest remote U.S. base. Except this base not only defends itself, but actively advances U.S. interests. Again, another drink of water. Because we know not all returns can be counted in cash. Some of the most lauded benefits of the U.S. and Israel partnership comes in form of intelligence and technological innovation, areas where Israel punches far above its weight and generously shares the rewards with America. So we have a former U.S. Air Force intelligence chief, General George Keegan, once assessed that Israeli intelligence supplied to the U.S. was equivalent to having 5 CIAs on our side. Considering the CIA's annual budget is in the ballpark of 15 billion, that analogy implies tens of billions of dollars worth of intel value alone. While that figure is more of like an anecdote than an audit, right? U.S. officials have repeatedly praised Israeli intelligence contributions, from tips that help avert terrorist attacks on U.S. forces to early warnings and technical insights on certain adversaries. And so one analysis even claimed Israel provides the U.S. with more intelligence than all NATO allies combined. Again, a very bold claim, I understand, but it gives a sense of how highly Israeli spycraft is valued in some corners of the Pentagon. In some practical terms, Israeli intel has proven its worth many times over, like when it assisted the U.S. in uncovering secret Syrian and Iranian nuclear sites, or provided crucial info on terrorist networks throughout the Iraqi and Syrian theaters, potentially saving American lives and billions in military contingencies that might have occurred without those insights. So again, hard to put a price tag on those certain things, but definitely a partnership and alliance there that's worthy. Then we move into sort of the high-tech innovation. There's the high-tech innovation pipeline between Israel and the U.S. Israel didn't earn the nickname Startup Nation for nothing. Its prowess in tech, for cybersecurity and artificial intelligence to drones and biotech, has been a boom for American industry. Very important. Many cutting-edge technologies used by the U.S. military and Homeland Security originate from the Israeli R&D. A classic example: Israel's expertise in Israel's expertise in armor plating and counter IED technology have been integrated into U.S. military vehicles, better protecting American troops in places like Iraq and Afghanistan. Joint R&D programs formalize this exchange of innovation. These two countries even co-fund several R&D foundations with friendly acronyms like BIRD, BSF, and BARD to spur collective research. So just one of them, the Binational Industrial R&D, or BIRD, as the acronym is said, Foundation, has invested about $282 million in hundreds of joint projects since 1977, which have generated over $8 billion in sales, much of that occurring to U.S. companies. And so in the private sector, U.S. tech giants from Intel to Microsoft have large research centers in Israel, tapping Israeli brainpower to design critical components of products. In fact, critical components of many leading American tech products are invented or designed in Israel, making U.S. firms more globally competitive. For instance, Intel's Israeli engineers developed the core processor chip family that powers countless American PCs. It's not an exaggeration. It's not an exaggeration to say Israel's functions as an overseas innovation hub for American companies. These kinds of benefits, new technologies, safer soldiers, foil terrorist plots, don't have an easy dollar value attached, again, but they enhance U.S. prosperity and security in very, very, very tangible and real ways. Again, that's why it's a partnership and an alliance, not this one-way street giveaway thing that most people think it is. Now, let's put the pieces together. On one side of the ledger, we have an annual $3.8 billion U.S. outlay, roughly 0.04% of the federal budget, or about $10 per American per year, the cost of a movie ticket for each of us to fund this alliance, right? On the other side, we've tallied an array of returns, tens of billions in trade, hundreds of thousands of jobs supported, many billions in defense contracts and R&D, invaluable intelligence and military cooperation, and strategic savings from conflicts deterred or handled by Israel. So how do we actually quantify the total ROI? It's a bit like adding apples, oranges, and some intangible fruit that only spies and generals fully appreciate, but we can at least do some, back of the envelope type of math for tangible data. So let's do it. Economic gains. The U.S. exports over $20 billion in goods and services to Israel yearly, and Israeli investment and companies pour money and jobs into the U.S. economy. Israel's investment in the U.S. tripled to over $24 billion over the past decade. This doesn't mean $20 billion is pure profit, but it's economic activity tied to the partnership. Even a fraction of that in tax revenue and business profits would offset the aid significantly. And then you move on to military and defense benefits. Israel spends roughly $3 billion of the U.S. aid back on American weapons annually, which directly supports U.S. jobs and industry. Moreover, Israel's deterrence likely saves the U.S. at least several billion dollars a year in military deployments and interventions not needed. As noted, U.S. officials estimated 15 to 20 billion a year would be required to do Israel's stabilizing role, a hypothetical saving of up to 15 billion. Again, another drink of water, doing a lot of talking. If you're still with me, thank you for being here. Intelligence and tech value. While hard to monetize, even conservative estimates would place the U.S. would place the value to the U.S. in billions. For instance, preventing one major terror attack or war can save countless lives and dollars. One could argue that the intelligence sharing alone might justify a large chunk of the aid, especially when leaders in the field claim it's worth 5 CIAs, i.e., like tens of billions of dollars. Similarly, joint tech ventures yield new products and efficiencies that bolster the U.S. growth, like the bird projects we mentioned. $8 billion in sales in one concrete example. You add all these up, you do your fucking back of the napkin math, and it's clear the returns substantially exceed the 3.8 billion input. But how much is it? Is it double, triple, or order of magnitude more? Of course, there's going to be different analysis, so different analyses yield different numbers. It's not exact science, but many experts conclude the U.S. and Israel alliance is easily a net positive investment. Even U.S. officials who scrutinize foreign aid have acknowledged that nearly all of the aid to Israel returns to the U.S. in some form. For example, a former U.S. ambassador noted that Israel functions as a force multiplier for U.S. defense and battle-tested R&D center for American industry. The bottom line, this is the bottom line. America likely gets several dollars of benefit for every dollar spent in Israel's security. So then let's tackle this huge $48 billion ROI claim. Is it fact or exaggeration? So what about that eye-catching sort of 48 billion figure is making the rounds? Some proponents of the alliance have band-aid about the claim that U.S. reaps a roughly $48 billion in return, implying the ROI is over 12 to 1 on the $3.8 billion aid. That's like a lot. That certainly sounds great, of course, but let's examine it a little bit more skeptically and crucially. And so this $48 billion number isn't an official stat from a congressional budget office report or anything. It appears to be sort of a rough aggregation of the various benefits we've described. And then likely someone came up with that number, and the 48 billion sounds really, really high, but there might be some validity to it. So it's likely coming from, the advocacy white papers or op-eds or something like that. But how might someone get to the 48 billion is most important. It could be, for instance, about 20 billion in U.S. exports to Israel, plus say 15 billion in strategic military savings, plus several billion in tech and intel value, plus some extra for good measure. Indeed, if you very liberally count the full 50 billion in annual bilateral trade as benefit to the U.S., you already hit that number. But that's kind of misleading, as trade is a two-way and it benefits are shared by both countries. And so a more reasonable approach might be is to focus on U.S. exports and specific savings. In 2024, the U.S. exported 24.2 billion in goods and services to Israel. That directly supports jobs and industry at home. Israel's presence saving, 15 billion of U.S. defense spending per Haig's scenario adds another chunk. Co-developed tech intel might plausibly account for the rest of one's assigns dollar value for them. For example, what's the value of Israel's cyber tech preventing hacks on U.S. infrastructure? Hard to say, but obviously definitely 100% not zero. There is some monetary benefit there. The short answer is that 48 billion is on the high end of estimates and likely inflates the ROI by counting many indirect or long-term multipliers. It's a figure suited to a punchy talking point, but not one like you'll find in an actual audit. So plausible, perhaps. Very under, plausible, yes, but under like very optimistic assumptions. But we've talked about a lot of stuff that is actually concrete and real and happening. So it's not totally verifiable because of much of that sum would be derived from inputted benefits like future economic growth from tech innovation or hypothetical, military costs avoided. So there's still tons of benefit in there. But also, when we think like critics would also note that some returns are not exclusively due to U.S. aid. For instance, U.S. and Israel trade would mostly exist even without 3.8 billion in aid, though the strongest ties between the countries certainly facilitate business ties. In any case, whether the true ROI is 3 to 1 or 10 to 1, it's very clear that the U.S. isn't simply flushing the $3.8 billion down the drain each year. It's more like planting seeds that yield a much larger harvest in both economic and security terms. As a reality check, one could also consider opportunity cost. What does the U.S. get from other foreign aid expenditures? Israel actually stands out. For example, America gives a bit over $1 billion annually to Egypt, and similarly amounts to Jordan, largely for strategic reasons, but few would argue those bring a tech boom or military innovations to America. In Israel's case, a developed, innovative ally, the returns are more palpable. Detractors might counter that U.S. support for Israel also carries intangible costs, such as complicating U.S. relations with some Arab oil states historically, or being a focal point in Middle East conflicts. Yes, maybe. However, in recent years, many Arab partners have grown closer to Israel, witnessed like the Abraham Accords, and U.S. relations with those states remain strong. So the costs in that sense are debatable. Meanwhile, hard dollar gains and strategic advantages are very concrete, as stated here in this episode. And so to sum it all up, if U.S. aid to Israel were judged like a business investment, the consensus among many analysts is that it yields substantial returns, like several times the principal. I've identified economic benefits that easily run into tens of billions and strategic benefits that senior U.S. officials value in a similarly grand terms. So is the ROI exact 12? Is it exact to match the sort of $48 billion claim? Probably not with precision, as that number glosses over a lot of complexities, but an ROI in the range of, say, 3-to-1 to 10-to-1 is supported by various data points we've discussed. Even at the low end, that's like getting 300% back on your investment, far better than any typical treasury bond or bank interest. So at the end, it is arguably one of the best deals in U.S. foreign policy portfolio. Hear that again. It's arguably one of the best deals in the U.S. foreign policy portfolio. Of course, this isn't to say that the partnership is only about dollars and cents. Much of it is rooted in shared values and strategic alignment. But since we're crunching numbers, the numbers do tell a very compelling story, and the numbers are also facts. The U.S. and Israel alliance seems to function in financial terms like a savvy venture capital stake, a relatively small upfront infusion that helps generate outsized innovations and capabilities down the road. Or as one commentator quipped, the United States doesn't give aid to Israel, it makes an extraordinarily high return investment. In the end, reasonable people can disagree on exactly how high the ROI is, but it is safe to conclude it's comfortably in the black. America gets economic growth, military R&D, regional stability, intelligence windfalls, and more in exchange for that annual $3.8 billion outlay. And so, as investments go, there's one portfolio item that has paid off handsomely by most measures. If nothing else, knowing that that a U.S. ally in the Middle East is self-reliant, innovative, and actively helping us in a return on investment in its own right, providing Washington a bit of peace of mind, a priceless commodity, might I say, in an otherwise very volatile world. And so again, most of this information is from Green Beret Nap Time. I just wanted to make an episode about it to get the information out to as many human beings as possible. And the full article with videos and pictures and links is all linked in the show notes below. But I explained it as best as I could with the information that was presented. So thank you very much. Again, full article, Substack, linked in the show notes with references, all that. But hopefully now you truly understand the partnership, the relationship, the alliance between U.S. and Israel, and the outsized benefits for both countries. But please research for yourself, question everything. That's very important. Lead with curiosity and have some discernment. That's very important in the modern world. But most of all, thank you for your time and attention, and I'll see you next time. Cheers. Thank you very much for tuning into that episode. And if you enjoyed it, click right here for another full-length episode of the podcast. And please don't forget to subscribe. But most importantly, above all else, please take good care of yourselves and others. And I'll see you next time. Lots of love. Cheers.